Hey, friends. We are live on Wednesday night. I know some of you are getting used to the almost live or so close to being live. I am actually live. It is 7 o'clock on Wednesday, October 1st. The Red Sox are in the middle of their second playoff game against the Yankees. So if I talk fast, it's just because I'm looking to get back to the game. But those of you who are not Red Sox fans or don't care about baseball at all, welcome to you as well. But we are here. April Small Group is here. Awesome. Glad to be back in fall church and community. So, again, um, let's just take advantage of the live night. So, yeah, I thought since we're live, since the small group's here, throw it another list. Found a few things that I thought were amusing. So, we'll go with it. So, we're going to talk about forgiveness in just a minute. But right before that, some signs. If you park in this parking lot and you're not visiting our daycare, your vehicle will be towed. And it's a learning academy. So, not sure exactly what these kids are learning, but it's not the proper spelling of toad. So, there we go. Don't even know what this sign is for, but I want to go there. Whatever happens, where cats are flying around like that, sounds amazing. This is great. This is Ace Hardware after somebody drove into their store and they put a little sign. Be kind of tough to see, but it's in small letters, but it says "We are open. Please park outside." That's a fair request, I think. Very specific. Speed limit 9.8, and then buckle up. This is great. Mechanic hourly rate, kind of on a scale. Depending on if you try to help, if you watch, if you worked on it first, or if you tell them how to do their job. Oh, AJ is here. Hello, AJ. And let's see. Do not push. Pedestrian signal button. Pedestrian walk signal is automatic, but I'm sure a lot of people have tried to push that stuff. This is kind of funny. Wars on the billboards. So the top one is Southwest, number one in economy class customer satisfaction by JD Power. And then right below it, it says, we have more flights Southwest than, well, good old rivalry there. This is great. Players. This looks like some sort of magic shop. Not sure exactly what goes on in there, but I like the fact that it says do not enter unless you're wearing deodorant and have showered in the last 24 hours. You'll be asked to leave if your attitude or smell is disruptive. The funny thing about this is you don't put a sign like this up unless there have been multiple violations of what you're asking people not to do. So, ew. There you go. Honk if you love Jesus. Text if you want to meet him while driving. I feel like I've seen that sign before. Free ATM, very catchy slogan. It's not free money, it's just a free ATM. I don't know what's free about it, or if it's somebody's looking to take the ATM. They really want you to stop at the stop sign. So, as opposed to putting something else there other than the stop sign, it's just a smaller sign that says, really, you got to stop. Here it is, no parking, not 5 minutes, not 30 seconds, not at all. Please do not block the driveway, and no parking. They really don't want people blocking their driveway. Probably the same people who put the extra stop sign there. Walkers this way, please. Cool, except the arrow and the man are going different directions. Very confusing. Glenn, fix your fence. Your llama is eating everyone's fruit trees. Glenn, get control of your llama. You know what I'm saying? Satisfaction guaranteed, or you're fire back. Benson Fire Department. I don't know if fire jokes are funny, but it's sort of witty. But I don't know if we should be joking around about fire. I don't know. That's about all I have to say about that. So, yeah. All right. Well, a few signs. I know some of you love the lists. Some of you would rather I never do a list again. But I figured since we were all live, we would do lists. So there it is. But we have been talking about forgiveness. And since we at Brookridge say we're inviting you to join us in experiencing the grace and forgiveness of Jesus as we follow him together, forgiveness is a big deal. Not just to us, though. Forgiveness was a big deal to Jesus, which is why in the Lord's Prayer, where he was kind of giving us a template, a guide to follow as we pray, some key things to hit on in our prayers. He said, forgive us as we forgive. So we talked about this last week. Then he told a parable in Matthew chapter 18 about a king who forgave someone a debt that they could never have paid back in 1,000 lifetimes. And then that person who was forgiven went right out and tried to collect a debt from somebody who actually could have paid it back. And the king did not deal well with that betrayal of the person who had been forgiven the great debt. And so the idea was, if we don't forgive, then we either don't understand forgiveness or take it lightly. When we understand how much God forgave us, when we understand how much Christ has forgiven us, that should empower us to forgive others. So God's grace always flies first, but ours must fly second. Those who know grace must show grace. And I gave you a quote from Tim Keller that said, on both a theological and a practical level, forgiveness is at the very heart of what it means to be a Christian. True forgiveness comes at a cost and is pursued intentionally within a community of believers. Pursued intentionally means we look for opportunities to forgive. Now, we ended last week with a question: if forgiveness is that important to God, how do we do it? How do we do it? So, 3 things. Number 1, how do we forgive? You acknowledge that there's a legitimate debt owed. In the family of Jesus and in the economy of God, forgiveness is not minimization. That's something that our world confuses a lot. We say things like, hey, sorry about that. And you're like, no big deal. Like, what are we doing? You're trying to shrink the trespass. You're trying to shrink the debt. It didn't bother me that much. Doesn't affect me. No big deal. We try to minimize what they've done. But then when somebody really wrongs you or hurts you or abuses you or somebody that you love, you can't minimize it. And if it sounds like the Christian community is minimizing it, the gospel never calls us to minimize sin. If anything, you take it even more seriously because you see what it cost God. So forgiveness is not minimization. It's not saying no big deal. You acknowledge that a legitimate debt is owed. That's 100 denarii of debt from the parable of Jesus in Matthew 18, 12 grand. That's 12 grand that you hurt me. When Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers in the Old Testament, he didn't come to them years later and say, you know what? No big deal. Actually, it turns out they have great vegetables in Egypt. No, he said, what you did was evil. And if somebody hurts you, you don't have to call it less than that. The gospel does not require that of you. What you did was evil, but then where do you go from there? You acknowledge a legitimate debt is owed, but then number 2, you take that debt and view it through the lens of the cross. That's why Jesus told this story. If the story was a guy owed another guy money and he made him pay it back, we'd be like, that makes sense. Feels logical. Great story. But because of the great forgiveness of the king, it makes what the forgiven servant did sound so evil. So what, for you and I, how are we going to be motivated to forgive? We have to see our lives in light of the king's sacrifice. Here's the thing. The king paid the debt in the story. But when he forgave that debtor, it's not like he suddenly got that 10,000 talents back. Someone's going to lose 10,000 talents, either the guy that owed them or the king. And the king said, I forgive you. You're free. I'll absorb the debt. So the king in this story took the debt for his wicked servant. And that's meant to be a picture of the gospel, that you and I have all wandered far from who and what we're meant to be under God. He gave us a mouth to bless people, and we've used it to curse people made in God's image. He's given us hands and feet to serve, and we've used them to indifferently blow by people. He's given us life and gifts to use to bless others, and we've used them to swerve past others and go for ours. We've disobeyed God in a million ways, and the Bible calls that a debt we've accrued. And God will bring that to light. So when you take debt in front of the king, you realize that no one gets away with anything. And that should be a comfort to you, because some of us think about forgiveness and we think of it as releasing somebody, that they're going to get away with something. And you don't want that. You want justice. And this story from Jesus helps you realize there will be justice. No one gets away with anything. They'll be called on the carpet before the king. And it's the same in the culture today. Whatever someone's done wrong against you, God doesn't blow off the wrong. It'll be paid for. God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay. God will make payment due for every wrongdoing done. It'll either be paid for by that person in eternity or by Jesus on the cross. But no one gets away with anything. When you realize that justice will be done by a holy God, that's what the cross shows me, that God didn't look down at our sin and say, wasn't that bad? In a couple world wars, like you all were just figuring it out. God doesn't say that. He says, you all were so wicked that your debt cost the payment of the precious blood of the Son of God. You're that bad, but I'm so loving that I'll pay it. So the cross shows you God's hatred of sin, that no one gets away with anything. There will be payment, but the king is willing to take it. And God is so loving that he will offer that same forgiveness to you if you accept the payment of the king. When you see their transgression against you through the lens of the cross, that makes you realize that the person who wounded me is a debtor, not just against me, but against God. But so am I. When you realize you're both debtors at the feet of a king whose grace you both need, it's easier to be gracious to them. But a Christian who accepts grace but holds resentment is a wicked servant. C.S. Lewis said, of all bad men, religious bad men are the worst. And it's true. Think of the movies. The worst bad guys are the religious bad guys. When you realize that person who hurt me may not have been all they were meant to be, but my judgmental resentment in the name of Jesus is infinitely uglier. When you see yourself in need of God's grace for your sin, you will become grateful for a benevolent king, and it will become easy for you not to minimize, but to release, to understand, hey, we are both debtors in need of grace. And praise be to God, we have a benevolent king. That's what you're meant to do. I don't have to call what the person did to me less than offensive, but it's reframed when I see it at the foot of the cross. I see it there. I acknowledge the debt owed. I resize it through the lens of the cross. And then finally, I release it. You at Brookridge know I love to talk about Pilgrim's Progress. There's a beautiful picture in the book Pilgrim's Progress where a pilgrim Christian is walking. He reads the Bible. This enormous burden grows on his back, and it's all the weight of his bitterness and resentment. His sin, his frustration, all the evil in his life literally grows as a pack on his back. And as he walks, it hunches him over. But when he gets to the cross, he falls on his knees in front of it. And as he does that, the big burden of bitterness breaks off his shoulders, rolls down the hill, and falls in the empty, open grave. And that's what we're meant to do. We acknowledge, hey, they hurt me. And then we take that hurt to the cross. And then when I see it in the light of his mercy, I release it. I release it. I will forgive because I'll think about how much my king forgave me. That's how you do it. My king is righteous and he will judge. No one gets away with anything. And when I acknowledge him that way, it fills me with terror because I'm guilty. But then when I realize he forgave me, I'm filled with relief. And then I'm a conduit of grace to other people. That power leads you to live a different life. When you embrace forgiveness, it changes you and you can be a change agent for others. News anchors reported in 2006 as they watched an Amish community who had a gunman come into their midst, take over a schoolhouse, and shoot a number of their daughters. Unfortunately, that doesn't stun us anymore. And that's not what stunned the media back then. What stunned them was the Amish community's response. While they were still learning which girls had passed away, a contingent of them went to the parents of the shooter and said, we've come here because we understand you're like us. You're also grieving the loss of a son. He had killed himself. And they comforted the shooter's parents. 30 of them, including parents who lost their children, showed up at his funeral. And they formed a human barricade to block the media from his family so they could grieve the loss of their son because they said, we're all grieving loss today. And then when the shooter's mom got cancer, they came over to clean her house. And every Christmas, they would load up in a bus and sing Christmas carols at her home. How could they do that? Because they know Jesus. They know how ugly sin is in all of its forms, but they know how transformative grace is. And so they've been touched by grace so they can show grace and not just be another casualty of the ugliness of the world, but be a conduit of kindness. Hate is too great a burden to bear, but forgiveness breeds mercy, and those who know grace are meant to show it. And you can, when you've tasted the grace of the great King, when you know your debt and his forgiveness, you're empowered to forgive them. I mentioned last week that unbelievable quote, we sent it out from Erica Kirk, which she said, talked about the young man who had killed her husband, and she said, I forgive you. That's just an amazing show of forgiveness. How do I release it? How do I release the debt? Romans 12 says, never take your own revenge. Leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay. So you resist thoughts of revenge, but when they come up, you put that person into the hands of God. You don't seek to do them harm. 1 Thessalonians 5 says, see that no one repays evil for evil. When they slight me, I don't burn them back. I release them to God. You grieve over their brokenness. Proverbs 24, do not rejoice when an enemy falls. Don't let your heart be glad when he stumbles. Social media might shut down if we obeyed Proverbs 24, right? How many people are rejoicing when somebody that they consider an enemy falls or stumbles? No good. No good. Jesus said in Matthew 5, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. We pray for them. You seek reconciliation. Romans 12, remember we went through Romans, says, if possible, as far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. And there's a caveat there, right? As far as it's possible, seek peace with all men. There are some situations where you need to forgive somebody, but to go personally to them to seek reconciliation would put you in harm's way or potentially them. Forgiveness doesn't mean staying in an abusive situation that's scary for you or your kids. Forgiveness does not mean enablement of abuse. You might love somebody, and the most loving thing you can do is to get away from them, to not let them back into your circle. Forgiveness does not mean enabling somebody to keep sinning against you, but it does mean you don't harbor bitterness. It means as far as it depends on me, I'm going to put grace into the atmosphere. I'm going to put love out into the world, and I'm going to trust that God will make things right in his time. We're meant to be like that. And the world changes when we are. And the consequences are dire if we don't. Maybe you've been really wounded. But woundedness does not need to define your story. Grace is too powerful for that. And if you say, I don't know if I can muster it, I don't know if I can summon that grace in my life, you can't. You don't have a reservoir of grace that deep. But you know who does? Jesus. When unforgiveness is planted in our hearts, all kinds of ugliness grows: hatred, jealousy, prejudice, anger, bitterness, misery. You know who has to deal with that? Usually not the person that hurt you, but the people that love us, our children, spouses, coworkers, friends. Here's the challenge. Maybe you've been so deeply hurt that your pain jades and clouds every single interaction that you have. Maybe you've known each other for years. Maybe you go to church with somebody and you've never taken the steps to truly resolve conflict. You might say, oh, I forgave them, but you still struggle. You struggle to process every glance, every perceived slight. You think the worst of every word said and every action observed. I am pleading with you today. Forgive. Let go of the bitterness and the hurt and the resentment. In a community of believers, are we going to hurt each other? Absolutely. But we'll also try to quickly resolve conflict, particularly when there's no intent to the offense. If we're going to be a community that reflects God's love and grace to the world, we have to commit to forgiveness. What I believe at Brookridge, in our network churches, in our group that comes together on Wednesday night, God is building a family, and family can sometimes be awkward and messy, but underneath it all is the foundation of love and commitment to God and to each other. So I'm begging you to lay aside the burdens that you've been carrying and go all in and forgive. Not too long ago, I read a story about a group of American soldiers during World War II. They were seeking out a burial site for one of their fallen friends. They were pulling out the next day and were hoping to bury him in a fenced churchyard cemetery nearby. As the sun was setting, they approached the house next to the church, knocked on the door. Priest answered, and they asked if they could bury their friend in the cemetery. He said, I'm sorry, but that's only for members of our church. He went on to tell the soldiers they could, if they chose, bury their friend near the cemetery, but on the other side of the fence. They were saddened, but they had few options, so that's what they did. The next day, they wanted to visit their fallen soldier's grave one last time before they moved on. When they came to the churchyard, they were shocked. They couldn't find his grave. It simply wasn't there. And one of them went to the parsonage door and knocked. What happened to the grave we dug? They said. One soldier was asking, like, what happened? And the priest answered, he said, it's not there. They're like, well, we dug it last night. It's not there. The priest said, hey, it's still there. He said, last night I couldn't sleep. All I could think about was what I told you, that you couldn't bury your friend inside our fence. He said, I regretted that. So last night I got up and I moved the fence. Now I want to be a guy that moves fences. I want to be a person who says, yes, I see the mess you've made of things, just like I have. But God wants us, mess and all, no matter what. And the good news is, it isn't that God's disinterested in what we do, that he doesn't care how we behave or what we do to ourselves or others. It's good news that he does care about these things. So he's going to change us. And if we just want the status quo, anybody can harbor bitterness and unforgiveness. If we just want that, the way everybody else processes things, we don't want him. And that's not a guilt trip. His desire to change us is just further evidence that we matter to him and he loves us. So my goal with relationships is no longer to try to change people. It's to introduce people to a God who's already reaching toward them right where they are. And that changes everything. It means everyone is welcome, and not theoretically, but really everyone, no matter what their political or religious beliefs, is welcome in my home, at my table. Refusing to be angry about other people's views isn't conflict avoidance or just happy talk. It's the very nature of serving people. We are called as Christians not to condemn the culture, but to redeem it. You know what's harder than living a life of forgiveness? Living a life of unforgiveness. I gave you a quote last week. Here's the one for tonight. We don't forgive people because they deserve it. We forgive because we didn't deserve it. We don't forgive people because they deserve it. We forgive because we didn't deserve it. You have to forgive. You are physically built to. Watch last Wednesday night if you want some stats on that. It'll destroy you if you don't. You are commanded to by God, but we don't have the tools. But thanks be to God for his amazing grace, that the King's grace flies first, that we could be forgiven. And then when you understand, you will find within you a reservoir of grace from which you can be a conduit to forgive others. And that's when the world will begin to change. That's when we'll see cultures shift. When the people of grace begin to show grace, the whole world will change. Just like we say at Brookridge, we invite you to join us in experiencing the grace and forgiveness of Jesus as we follow him together. Let's intentionally pursue forgiveness. Why? Because we've been forgiven. Because that's what God's asked us to do. He's like, listen, I'm going to forgive you of an unimaginable, unrepayable debt. And the only thing that I'm asking of you is that you extend that same grace and forgiveness to other people. Not easy all the time, but right? We acknowledge the debt, we resize the debt in view of the cross, and then we release it. Hope this is encouraging to you. And this is something that we are meant to pray daily. God, forgive me, forgive my sin as I forgive other people. We pursue intentional forgiveness as a community. All right. What else we got? Oh, Claire's here. Hey, Claire. Mom is here. Hi, Mom. Do I still have the medallion? Many of you know that Pastor Anthony and Miles and I will occasionally play golf for a little priceless warrior medallion. I currently own it. Kelly Mills, hello. Thank you, Claire, for coming on. I appreciate all of you. Take some time during the week. I hope to be able to encourage you. And we learn together. We grow together. Sunday, we're back in the life of David. We're spending 2 weeks talking about David and Goliath. Fantastic story. Very entertaining, but also very challenging for us. So 9:30 Sunday morning, David and Goliath. small group. Hope you have a great rest of your night. Friends and family, have a great rest of your week. Going back to watch the Red Sox.